That's set to the cloud. That's not supposed to be automatic. Okay, I'm sorry, Emiliano, Alejandro, I can't hear you any longer. Is it okay if we just uh chat from now on? Is that okay? Yes? No? Okay. Um, can everyone else hear me? Um, I didn't set myself in Spanish, did I? Okay, good. Okay, I'm gonna keep you on spotlight if that's okay, or I could spotlight everyone. Is that okay, Ray?
Yeah.
Which would you prefer? Sorry,
Everyone.
everyone. Okay, I think that's what you said to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and Vivian and Hanan, I'll say the title and stuff like that, and then you guys will launch in.
Okay.
Three.
Oh, can't do that. Somebody just left. Add spotlight. Yeah. For some reason, I can do it from myself. That doesn't make sense. Add spotlight. Hey, hey, we're in business. Cooking with gas.
Oh,
Beautiful.
great. Look at that. That's fantastic.
Okay. Any last words? Why not? That came
Oh
out
man.
right. That transliterated different. Any.
No, no. I think we're good.
All right, I'm gonna start letting people in then.
Super. Oh my God, there's 11 people already.
Yay. I like watching the countdown.
Hello, everyone. As you trickle in, feel free to say your name. If you want to say your preferred pronouns, what company or community you're a part of. You can share all that in Zoom chat, which should be on the right side of your screen.
And Bruce, are you gonna say a few words before we start? Are we waiting a moment, or should I begin?
If I think whenever you'd like to start, this is Dr. Ray Dubensky at Loyola University. I don't know if you need another introduction. Philosopher, professor, I can't say it.
All the
Philosopher,
things, some of the things, a
ecologist
few of the things.
at
Um,
the School of Environmental Sustainability, and he can take over from here.
Okay, let's get rocking. Thanks everybody for showing up. We were wondering how many folks were going to show up. This looks like a fantastic crew. We want to talk about opportunities for community university partnerships within the Chicago region food system. And I'll be presenting sort of, we want this to be a discussion, but first, Vivian and Hanan are going to talk about some of the interviews that we and other folks in our group here in Loyola conducted with folks in the food system last summer, and sort of give some context. And then once we have that context, then we sort of want to dive in on some discussion. So that's kind of what we're up to. Let's see. So if I click that, there we go. We have some other folks that have been involved in this. Sarah Koo, Karen Schauacker, Megan Conway, Tanya Schusler, who's here, I believe, Kevin Erickson, who's also here, Marlene Brito Milan, and we want to really thank everyone who shared about their organization's work in all of the interviews that we did. And this was funded by internal grant here at Loyola from the Schreiber Venture Fund Innovation Grant. Okay, so I think at this point, Vivian and Hanan are going to take over for a little bit.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Ray, for the intro. So, a little bit more continuing our intro. So, for this project, our goal is to help inform on potential partnerships and ways that we can foster mutual learning and sustained engagement to advance food sovereignty initiatives. And like Ray said, this work was conducted through Loyola's School of Environmental Sustainability, which we will also refer to as SES. Um, but the project seeks to answer the question, what are the primary assets and challenges in the pursuit of a greater food sovereignty, cooperative entrepreneurship, worker welfare, food waste management, environmental sustainability, and biodiversity? Next slide, please. So, a brief overview of our research process. We identified 30 organizations through networks and online research, and we recognize that this is a non-representative sample of the Chicago regional food system. So, of those overall 30, we were able to interview 22 organizations, and all of these interviews took place either on site or over Zoom. And we asked interviewees a standardized set of questions about their organizational history, current initiatives, assets, challenges, future visions, and the perceived role of universities in relation to the Chicago regional food system. And then we analyzed these interview findings thematically to find overlapping and diverging patterns across organizational responses. And so in this summary, we report themes with strong consensus or varied perspectives. Next slide.
Awesome. And now getting into our results. So the organizations we interviewed play various roles within food and agriculture, ranging from access and affordability, business incubation, community health, connectors and information sharing, distribution, and more. While this sample is not fully representative of the Chicago regional food system, it provides insight into the perspectives of organizations who are actively working to address issues related to food sovereignty. We recognize that various perspectives are not captured in this project, however. Next slide, please. So we asked organizations how long they have existed, as well as what type the organization is classified as. 7 organizations existed for over 20 years, 9 for 10 to 20 years, and 6 for less than 10 years. and over half are incorporated as nonprofits, which you can see on the slide on the screen. And next slide, please. We also ask questions to gauge organization size. One indicator is the organization's staff size. These organizations are drawing upon the human resources of full-time and part-time staff, volunteers, contractors, seasonal workers, and more. Many of the organizations are small in size in respect to paid staff. Almost half the organizations, about 9, had less than 5 full-time staff members. 6 organizations had 5 to 10 full-time staff. 5 organizations had over 10 full-time staff members, and 2 organizations relied solely on volunteers. Many different people are needed to conduct the work of these organizations, and additional human resources may be in the form of board and council members or membership holders. Next slide, please.
All right, so we also asked participants to define which geographic areas they serve. And so the total number of organizations in this chart does exceed 22 because several organizations cover more than one area. So as you can see, there is a high concentration in the south side of Chicago, as well as a hyper local focus, which we defined as organizations serving the community in which they reside. We also asked them to define the populations that they primarily engage with. And so a total of 12 organizational representatives mentioned serving communities of color or underserved communities, with several referencing a greater need in those communities due to the history of inadequate funding and resources. 4 participants mentioned serving immigrant communities, particularly Eastern European, Mexican, Venezuelan, Colombian, as well as refugees, asylum seekers, and undocumented individuals. Organizational representatives also serve other populations, such as unhoused individuals and at-risk and returning citizens. And 6 participants specifically mentioned engaging with youth populations, and 5 organizations mentioned working with seniors, and 3 of those being involved specifically in food assistance programs. And 2 of those organizations specifically are working with LGBTQIA+ individuals. Next slide, please. So as participants defined their organization's current initiatives and missions, we grouped these together into common themes, which you can see on the list here on the right. So organizations' missions are related to equity, community health, environmental sustainability, circularity, organic material diversion, so think food waste for that one specifically, cultivating community connections, economic development, grower support, and building collective power and political advocacy. Those last 2 can go hand in hand as some organizations have a concrete focus on stakeholder engagement. Over half of the people we interviewed stated that they have a focus on community involvement in current initiatives related to education, ecological efforts, member and volunteer opportunities, or political advocacy. And although they might use a different term than food sovereignty, almost all organizational representatives mentioned that their mission included efforts to enhance food sovereignty. And 7 of those have missions related to education. So a lot of overlapping there. But next slide, please.
So, interview participants held differing perspectives on food insecurity in Chicago. Several explained how their organizations address high food insecurity resulting from historical factors and continued disinvestment on Chicago's south and west sides, which they contrasted with the north side. On this slide, a map of Cook County is shown, and community areas with higher food insecurity rates are represented with darker shades of green. Yet, a few organizational representatives highlighted food insecurity within Chicago's more affluent North Side neighborhoods, such as Rogers Park, where Loyola is located. They noted that people experience food insecurity in every community, creating a need to increase food access and affordability across the city. Next slide, please. And here we have a quote from an interview participant, and it reads, quote, "Every single community has people that need this. You might not know it. This isn't something that you can see, people struggling with food insecurity, end quote. And again, this just emphasizes that food insecurity is felt across all communities in Chicago. Next slide, please. Moving on to assets, we asked interview participants what assets, whether internal or external, help support their organization's work. We got a range of responses and highlighted some major themes across the board. So first, nearly every interviewee described the importance and prevalence of relationships within their communities, partnerships, whether formal or informal, with other community organizations are vital to fulfill operations and reach wider audiences. Nearly everyone interviewed discussed infrastructure assets like physical space or equipment, and many organizations built or received infrastructure to support their operations. Next, nearly everyone interviewed discussed the talents and dedication of their organization's staff and volunteers who are motivated by their passions for their organization's work. The staff of some organizations may be highly specialized or may include single individuals solely responsible for the entirety of large tasks, such as running a farm stand. And lastly, about 1/3 of organizations identified financial resources as assets. Financial support includes grants from governments or private foundations, as well as donations from individuals or other organizations. And some have partnered with other organizations to collectively request for funding. Next slide. And here we have another quote from an interview participant that reads, quote, "You just can't underestimate how important human connection and social networks are in this sort of operation," end quote. Next slide.
All right, so moving on to challenges, nearly all participants experienced financial challenges, which relate to the economy and more specifically, the instability of grant cycles and the ability to secure grant funding due to specific grant requirements. The extra task of changing programming and applying for grants is an additional strain on staff's capacity. Communication was also a struggle for organizational representatives who wanted to expand their audience. We found that programs had trouble getting the word out due to lack of time to advertise, language, or internet and technology access barriers. So finding the messaging to help communities understand the cause of some of the struggles that they're facing is especially difficult due to lack of awareness on environmental issues. And nearly all participants mentioned feeling strained by staff capacity, physical resources, or other various capacity constraints. And many organizational representatives stated that they wanted to expand their program or its impact, but it's just not feasible at their current size and limitations. And so the complicated and time-consuming process related to government affairs is another strain on organizations as they have to jump through hoops to proceed with their operations, such as permitting for produce sales. And then lastly, infrastructure was also stated to be a challenge by over half of our participants. And so some examples of infrastructure challenges include, but are not limited to, not having legal ownership of land or the cost and skills required to maintain infrastructure or various tools, as well as the limits of their physical space. Next slide, please. And one of the quotes from our challenges question from a participant was, "So it's a little frustrating that we don't get the money or the resources. We want to do more, but there's a limit of what we can do. And also as volunteers and student, there's also a limit that you have to put on yourself." And we felt that this captured the limits of capacity from that section. Next slide, please. And so then moving on to organizations' future visions and wants, we asked participants to describe this and grouped responses into two categories of systemic change or overall food system, for the overall food system. And so participants discussed their desires to expand their current engagements, and this includes increasing participation, education, impact and engagement with individuals, and also solidifying current programming. This may include working more deeply with the community, municipalities, and creating more partnerships. Systematic change included wishes to see guaranteed funding rather than relying on grants that they may or may not receive. This stable funding could come in the form of state budgets or program funding by the city or other local municipalities. Participants who were involved with farmers and growers expressed wanting changes to land access processes. So, this may include easier pathways to ownership and also a guarantee that the city would not strip them of their land rights. Next slide, please. And so, another quote that we selected was, if people have a more direct relationship with the land, it's going to make a world of difference for our environment, for our culture, for food access and quality too. Just having a more direct relationship with our food. And obviously that, would signal the collapse of all kinds of systems that we've been accustomed to. Next slide, please.
All right, moving on to the role of universities section to discuss different types of collaborations. So we asked participants how they would want to collaborate with universities, and a wide variety of collaborations were discussed and proposed by the organizations interviewed, such as internships, volunteers, class projects, site visits and field trips, knowledge sharing and building networks, guest speakers, educating the next generation of food system workers and advocates, research, and solidifying university partnerships and building trust. And we will go into depth into some of these bullet points now. Next slide, please. So something that many participants emphasize is the importance of students receiving hands-on experiences. Many interviewees suggested that exposing students to different areas and opportunities in their surrounding communities is necessary for a holistic educational approach. With Chicago being an urban environment, there are many opportunities for students to be exposed to various methods of work within the food system, and demographic diversity poses an opportunity to expose students to under-resourced communities where this work is especially necessary. Through experiences, students can gain skills that cannot be taught, such as cultural sensitivity, a deeper sense of respect and empathy for those experiencing food insecurity, and more. This may strengthen soft skills such as communication and community organizing. Building connections to different methods of food business can expand their perspectives about what is possible rather than perpetuating current practices that cause harm. Interviewees mentioned alternatives such as new economic models, food rescue, and communal approaches. It is important for students to actively be involved in communities and food system work, as this exposure helps them to envision and be a part of these pragmatic solutions. Next slide, please. And here we have another quote that says, if students don't see it, it doesn't exist. They never seen anything like this. And so it is like wide eyes, whoa, this is totally weird. And you can see the gears turning and they're like, it's possible. There are people here that look like me and they're doing stuff. I think a big piece of it is just getting students' eyes on alternate ways of doing things. And again, this quote just emphasizes the importance of students gaining exposure to alternate methods and knowing various possibilities that they can help play a role in. Next slide, please. All right. So moving on to internships and volunteers, a handful of organizations raised the idea that internships can be more burdensome for the organization, and particularly for small size organizations that have less than 10 staff. They express that interns are a strain if they need to be trained, supervised, and guided due to capacity constraints. One cause of this was that retraining and re-onboarding interns can be time-consuming. Though on the other side, other smaller size organizations felt that they had benefited greatly from interns that were externally funded and that had predetermined roles. And furthermore, when interns came to work with organizations with interests and goals predetermined, organizations expressed that it was a more positive outcome than when they were placed with the task of assigning interns work. Additionally, organizations want to make sure that interns have a mutually beneficial experience and are not only being tasked with busy work.
All right. So this we get to punctuate the rest of the talk, and so we're gonna sort of seek some feedback. So my prompt here, what are your thoughts about internships and volunteers? What works? What doesn't work? How can universities help local organizations with internships and volunteers? And so in lieu of breakout rooms, which I think is a great idea because we're all sort of staying in the same room, we can have one discussion. I do actually want to give literally 60 seconds for everyone everyone to think about this. And so I'm going to do this a few times. If this is uncomfortable, just bear with it, but this will give everybody a chance to think. So I'm starting my timer, and I'm going to solicit feedback in 60 seconds. All right, that's what a minute feels like. Any thoughts or input? We would love to hear it.
Hi, this is Christina from the Greater Chicago Food Depository.
Hi,
And
Christina.
oh yeah, I really love this question because actually this is something a topic I was talking about with our volunteer manager and connecting college students. And I feel that what's missing is if it's not a paid opportunity, like what else can they get out of it, right? Like I feel a lot of times because people obviously need to live and keep on, paying for their lifestyles, that they're looking for like that quick, like, am I gonna get paid? What am I gonna get out of this? But we forget to put like in the description, like those skills and where that could potentially lead to. So I feel that maybe if we're more clear on what we're asking and what they're gonna get, if there's no monetary funding for it, like what other things can they get out of it?
For sure, and that's a lot of things, and that obviously comes with the paid internships as well. One thing that we've wrestled with sometimes versus with the paid versus non-paid is thinking about the idea that because we do live in this system where everybody needs to pay for their food and their shelter and all of these other things that really should be the basics, in my opinion. The folks that are more privileged are able to take those internships that don't have pay for that reason. But that's just kind of my chat back. Other thoughts?
I'll jump in here. My experience on this is a little bit interesting simply because I was previously working in a nonprofit and hosted a bunch of university interns, and now I'm on the other side of the puzzle, working in a university, supporting students that are doing internships. And so I think one of the key things that universities could better set up organizations with is keeping in mind that like nonprofits often experience turnover, and that people may not know your programs the way that you know your programs. And so for instance, like if you refer to a certain funding family, that is like the shorthand that your university uses to describe a certain internship, like that means nothing to someone that's not in that shared language. So like having kind of like a fact sheet around like logistics of like, this is how many hours they work. This is like the duration of their time. This is what they do have flexibility or don't have flexibility over. Should they be clocking in or out? Like front loading all of that, which sounds really like kind of obvious in some instances, but just is not always the case across the board, I think is super important. And I also think universities can do a good job of making it clear like who the point person is beyond that intern.
Right.
So if they're reporting into a different caseload manager or different full-time staff person or part-time or program coordinator or what have you, having that contact information is helpful. I think also too what nonprofits could do a better job of is having, and this could be coaching that they get from their university peers, but like having an understanding of these are the tasks that I know for sure my intern is going to work on, or the projects, and having that scoped and outlined. But also expressing to the intern if there is an expectation that they're coming up with their own projects.
Mm.
I think one of the things that can get lost in the shuffle, that can be challenging, is that like students are coming out of an educational atmosphere where largely they're not deciding what assignments they're going to do. They're not going to like be picking and choosing a lot of things in their educational career, particularly if they're undergrad. And so, but like if we on the work side, or the like the nonprofit or work partner side, have this expectation of like students taking initiative, is like a phrase you hear kicked around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to actually like identify and coach that skill. And sometimes you just have to tell the job site that's hosting the intern, like, if you want them to do that, you have to invite them to do that, because there's a power dynamic to it. There's also a habit and transition of being a student into being a worker. That is something that like is part of what a young person is learning through an internship.
Great, thanks. And just a point of clarification, when you're talking about the hours and the flexibility and clocking in and all out, that would be the university laying that all out in
Yes.
clear detail for all parties involved, right?
I think both need it, right? Like the volunteer or the job site needs to also have a sense that says like, here's our normal working hours, or here's everyone's in the office on Wednesday, or whatever it looks like. But the broad strokes of what the internship contains,
Mhm.
if it's a university funded position, I think the universities need to do a better job of communicating that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Ashley, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi, thanks. So I ran a study abroad volunteer program in Uruguay for the past 7 years, connecting university students with agroecological farmers there. And now I'm back in Chicago trying to do something similar. A couple of insights from my 7 years doing that. Having a long-standing relationship, I was kind of like a third party connecting the university students with the farmers. Having an ongoing relationship with, the farmer or the organization, I think is really important, to not have this kind of mercenary attitude of like coming in and sort of everybody's being really instrumental with one another, but instead thinking like, what does the farmer actually want? What do they need? What are their limitations of time? What does the student want? What do they want to get out of this? Can they get credit hours? Can they get some sort of certificate in sustainability that adds to their studies, global understandings, et cetera? And just at least in my case, I try to pay farmers for their time hosting volunteers, because people they think, okay, well, you're getting free labor, but they're setting aside a lot of time to organize activities for volunteers. So I think that's a really important equity aspect.
Yeah, and that gets back to the idea we heard from our interviewees that it's wonderful to have interns and volunteers, but at the same time, sometimes it's like, well,
It's
what
a
are they doing
burden, so
today? It's a burden.
it's work, right?
It's work. Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
make work for that.
Yeah.
That's great. We have many other prompts coming, but I want to just pause for a second. Any other thoughts about internships and volunteers? And I'll say, like, at the end too, we'll have a chance to chat about all things.
This is Danny Block, just coming from the perspective of Chicago State, and this is probably true for most schools. It is a very small minority of our students who can take on paid internships, and which is it's too bad, but it does create inequality. And even when we've had people who really want interns from CSU, even if they're paid, but they're sort of locationally challenged, on the other end of town or whatever, they have a lot of trouble taking. So it's something we really struggle with, but we're trying to make it easier for our internships. But they also just may not know that they're so important.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of their future careers.
Giving them as other skills and perspectives and experiences and things. And so, yeah, I'm sure if we could all wave a magic wand, we would all have all of the internships always paid. But I recognize there's a lot of trade-offs and all of that. Let's charge forth.
Sorry, I'm unmuted now. All right. So moving on to universities and class projects. Many participants expressed that class projects are helpful. However, the impact of short-term projects like one semester may not be substantial progress for the organization's desired goals. So it is important to note that class projects in many interviews were discussed as a means to assist organizations in specific ways just for the time being, and that they may not have a continuous impact, and that's okay. But short-term projects can be helpful to fulfill specific needs, such as expanding infrastructure, which we recently mentioned as a challenge for that many participants stated. And so one solution that was proposed was building off of other work or collaborations to help amplify impact. And this might be accomplished by ensuring continuity between projects and interns to keep the momentum going.
All right, here's our second prompt. What are your thoughts about class projects? If you've had that experience, what works, what doesn't work? If you haven't, what would you imagine would? How can universities help local organizations through class projects? And I'm going to do this again, 1 minute, 60 seconds. Here we go, everybody. All right, thanks for enduring that. I would love to hear any thoughts about this, any experiences, or what could work, or what could be cool, or what isn't cool.
I can jump in on this one really quick.
Thanks,
This
Kevin.
is Kevin Erickson from Loyola. Um, so I think the point about the duration of a semester has been pretty difficult for a lot of projects. I think that's a strong point. One thing that has helped me is to first ask the organizations or hosts what their needs are instead of coming up with projects in a classroom without knowing what the needs of these organizations are. So instead of framing it as a project, I think we ask, what are your needs and what are ways that we might be able to help you? And that's the first place to start. Then it's sort of packaging that into what a project could look like. And another piece to this is sort of there's a planning side to a project, and then there's an implementation or an execution side to a project. There may not always be enough time to do both the planning side and the implementation of a project. And we have done some projects that are just on the planning side, which presents the host with the opportunity to either accept or not accept that project to carry on themselves. And it just gives them maybe a budget and the tools of how they might be able to carry out the project. And it's just kind of saving the host some time from having to look into it themselves. And of course, the students get to learn from that process. So that's been a helpful way to advance projects through the class with local organizations, I would say.
I want to echo a lot of the things that Kevin said, and also bring up a point that Ashley mentioned kind of in the last section of having continuity with a third party person. So whether that's the professor or whether that's like a specific office on campus, just kind of building that understanding over time, I think is helpful because it reduces some of the strain of that like onboarding or understanding that was reflected in the participants' feedback from your research. The other thing that I think too that I would just add to Kevin's point as well is that like sometimes it can be helpful to ask what, in addition to like what are your needs, it would be like what would you do if you had extra time? Because there could be things, for instance, that like are very research heavy that actually do lend themselves to class projects or student engagement or like an academic side. one thing that like comes to mind, for instance, is like in grant applications and being competitive in those, you want to be able to speak to the impact that you're making on the field. But not a lot of people that are doing hands-on day-to-day work have a time to do like a lit review of like where the field is going and what the updates are, right? And so that could be something that like partnered then with some experiential learning that is like hands-on volunteer experience with the student. That's something that is kind of working on some of that like overhead cost or like systemic work that goes into running a nonprofit or running some of this work. That I think students can have a bigger impact on rather than I got to come up with something that 30 people can do at once. And so I think that could be different or like an opportunity to be helpful.
Agreed. Just noting Alex included in the chat. I'm only kind of able to follow the chat and the discussion at the same time, but that there's a discontinuity. There's no congruence between the semester schedule and the summer growing season for producers. So thinking creatively, I think about ways to make that work could be helpful.
Yeah, I would just add budget, that we should provide a budget for this. We should expect a host to fund their own project that students are engaged in, and just being clear about what that budget is in advance. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Okay. Like I said, let's keep going. We'll have a chance to talk about all this at the end.
All right. Another proposed collaboration was site visits and field trips. University students having an opportunity to go out to various sites to see how classroom concepts are applied in the real world is important, as seeing processes firsthand and getting that exposure is different than just simply learning about it. And this could also serve as a chance for students to network with organizations and individuals. Also, field trips for community members were discussed, such as bringing younger students from various communities to Loyola to see those operations and help envision their opportunities for their future, such as in higher education and just for overall exposure.
Are folks able to see the screen right now? Thumbs up. Okay, great. I got a message from someone that they couldn't. So Tanya, I guess that's you. So our prompt this time, would you be interested in a visit from students or a visit to Loyola or other area universities? What could make that a more valuable experience for everyone involved? Would you be interested in speaking to a class or to have someone from a university speak at your organization? Again, I'm going to give us 60 seconds of quiet to think about that. All right, thanks everybody. Responses?
Hi, I'm Angela. I think this is it's it's good to have on-site visits, but not everybody takes into account the size of the farm. Like we had people come down with 30 people on like an acre, a farm that's an acre, so it kind of depends, and you need to ask questions and read the room before you bring people, um because then it's just a pain in the butt, and you have nothing to do with all of these people. They're getting in the way and they're messing things up.
Oh
On the
gosh.
on the other hand, I think it's always great to get a hands-on learning experience. That's the way I learned. I was an intern at Windy City Harvest, and everything was hands-on, and I experienced there is no teacher like experience. So I think yes, as long as it's done in the right way.
Fantastic. And that, so I suspect you're drawing on a specific memory of having too many people in too small a space. So really thinking about the logistics of those visits sounds like something that's important to consider.
Yes. Yes.
I can jump in real quick. One thought on from the university perspective that we've had that's challenging is typically if we're planning field trips or offsite visits, we have to include it as part of the time in the class. And so it's usually taking the place of class time. So if we're, taking a van to drive an hour somewhere and then we're spending 2 or 3 hours and then we're driving an hour back, like that could account for a week of our classes. And so there isn't exactly a really nice mechanism to sort of get through that barrier unless it's sort of in addition to class time or it's optional for students. So I'm just kind of flagging that on the university side. And I would love if anyone has any examples of how they've worked through that. Another thought is potentially paying or compensating nonprofits for visits offsite. It's not really something I would consider as a university for charging people. I think that we're here to show people those sorts of things for free, but I think that universities have resources and could be paying fees to go to offsite places and help generate a little revenue for these organizations.
Great. Thanks. Ashley?
Sorry, I'm off video. I went to go pick up my daughter from preschool. So one model I've seen work well that I've done in the past in Uruguay and will be doing again next year is a credit-bearing class that has a required field trip, basically over spring break. Sometimes you have like a Thanksgiving break or winter break, and then you can account for those hours in the required break by having sort of less classroom time during the semester, if that makes sense.
It does. Christy?
Yeah, it's worked well for us to, we often have kind of combined the guest speaker function with volunteering at a garden. And ours is very close. Ours is 2 blocks away. So that takes care of the transit issue. But it's worked really well for our students to be able to hear from the organization about here's the context, here's the background, here's the partners, meet these people. And so we kind of get a nice class visit essentially, but then we spend an hour weeding and mulching and like getting our hands dirty. And that's been a really nice combination for us that is refreshing to our students to actually like do something physical, but then still have the context around what is happening here. So that's worked really well for us.
Yes, and making sure that we have the right size class for the right size space, as Angela pointed out.
Exactly. Yes.
I think building off that idea could be the potential for a class that the entire class is just visiting organizations, doing site visits, volunteer work, and or projects, and maybe there's a different site every week or multiple sites throughout the semester. I could see that as a viable way of making that work too. Right, let's do it.
That's a cool idea, Kevin. I like that.
I would say that's actually how we do it. Is our class goes around to lots of organizations, and farming is just one of them. Yeah. But
excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna keep going. This this one's interesting, Vivian and Hanan. Let's talk about this and then we'll put a pin on the discussion and move to the next one, just in the interest of time.
Okay, sounds good. I'll make it brief. So, another proposed role of universities was the idea of universities playing a role in the idea of um, networking and idea sharing. And this is a fairly new concept that would involve building relationships and serving as a point of contact that could build trust within the community. I think we touched on this a little bit in the discussion, but traditionally, universities have been surrounded by an iron curtain, and multiple participants that we spoke with expressed a desire to have a relationship with universities to exchange knowledge. And so this could alleviate changes related to capacity constraints and communication. And then participants also expressed that they would like to learn from the universities and from other organizations. Next slide.
Yes, and so we'll have this at the end, and so if this is something that you want to jump in on right now, I think we'll have time for that. Right, so here we are, education now.
Awesome. So many participants discussed their qualms with the current education system. Nearly all participants agreed that a holistic approach to food system education is necessary to prepare the next generation of workers. And many felt that important historical events and movements are left out of our current educational system. And so organizational representatives discussed that America as a whole needs to reckon with its past with slavery and ongoing systematic oppression for Black farmers, acknowledging indigenous practices and understanding the exploitation of migrant workers, as well as supply chain inequities that disadvantage growers and industrialization. So, if universities do seek to improve the food system, they have a duty to instill knowledge about the entirety of the system's history. And so that would mean changing the system as a whole, looking more into the ecological process as well of the inputs and energy and the outputs of waste, and looking to minimize the latter. Next slide, please. So then a quote we pulled from this section was that if I were to wave a magic wand, it would probably be to fundamentally shift our entire education system. So the young people are understanding our food system from a perspective of land stewardship, mutuality, care, and reciprocation with the land, and really unlearning this very, very colonial, extractive way of relating to the land based off how much yield can I pull. Next slide, please. And so another quote that we thought was also important reads, I would like a much wider education program about healthy food and what that means and education about our food system. Then we wouldn't probably have to spend so much time educating people or sharing with them what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. Next slide, please. Okay, so then in addition to having a holistic approach to food systems thinking, interviewees expressed their desire to see multiple types of science skills, particularly those related to lab work, which includes testing for pollutants in various mediums, such as water, air, and soil quality testing. Others might include technical training, a full season of farm experience was stated to be especially important in the production sector, regenerative agriculture concepts, soil science, food safety, and pest management. Other important skills that were mentioned in the food system are things outside of the science realm, so business, sales, and engineering. An interviewee also mentioned the importance of gaining food justice knowledge at a local level. Go ahead, Ray.
Sorry, that's a
I'll
jumping
go.
gun. Our next prompt. In what ways are universities doing a good job preparing students for the food system of the future, and in what ways could they improve? I will give us 60 seconds of reflection. That's a minute. Thoughts? Andrew?
Yeah, I'm jumping in here just now, so hope I'm not going back to something. But I just wanted to comment on sort of the irony of a school that I went to, which had a great agroecology program, but it had a cafeteria which contracted Aramark for its food, and so there were efforts to change that and everything. But it's sort of an interesting irony about how that all works, and if you get students who aren't even interested in these topics to really appreciate the rewards of the sort of food systems that we're talking about, maybe that is really important.
Yeah, being consistent all the way through. Yeah, I know at Loyola we find that we're in that predicament as well. And I think other folks in this room could speak better to this, but I believe Aramark has made some concessions and has tried to do some things in the right direction. But at the same time, they still are the colossus that they are and move food in the ways that they move it.
So there was always like potlucks and stuff, but then that's a pretty limited scale. So I don't know. Yeah.
Other thoughts about that aspect or just the education that folks are getting generally? I guess when you speak to young people that have been through university, what things do you see in them that you're like, oh great, this is the future I want, and what things are you not seeing?
In the chat, we have some comments that could include suggestions like more continuing education that's affordable. Not everything needs to end in a degree. There can be programs that, sorry, there's a lot of comments. Yeah, so things like we must bring back core curriculum, agricultural subject topics, and emphasizing the role of application of this information and skill.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to move on. Oh, go. You want to say something, Kevin?
I was just saying, I think there's also in this conversation, there's a difference between students that might be in environmental science majors or studying food systems or ag. We have a concentration here at Loyola in food systems and agriculture that I think those students are getting great, hands-on experience and background. I think the question becomes, what about the other 15,000 students across the university? We're not really winning this, this game if we're not kind of reaching a larger body of students. One example that we've done is created a group called Nourish, and it's sort of an interdisciplinary group of students that coalesce around nutrition, dietetics, health science, food, agriculture, sustainability, and it brings together different types of student majors and perspectives, and they all get to sort of learn about each other's area, and ends with a campus project that they do every year. I think we could do much more also in terms of environmental science classes being offered at the 100 or 200 level for students, including food or regenerative agriculture issues. When I went to school, excuse me, every student had to take biology, right? Now, here at Loyola, every student is, no matter who you are, you're taking environmental science, which I think is a big win. Let's see, if we can get more food topics into those 100 level courses would be great.
Agreed. Okay, so the session goes to 3:15, correct, Bruce? So I want to make sure we're okay on time.
Yeah, we have to. The tech people have to get on other calls around 3:15.
Oh
So
wow, okay.
Sorry, yeah. If this is like a huge discussion, so like normally I want to allot like 15 minutes to discussion, but if everyone saw the poll, just see if you can take the poll, and then we save the chat, the Zoom chat, and this is recorded. It would be on YouTube in English and in Spanish.
Fantastic.
And anything else you guys want to share? So
I have like one big
you
last prompt, if that's
well, you have
that's all
until
right.
3:15. I'm just
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks. This would be it. Research.
All right. So for research, almost half of participants expressed interest in collaborating with universities on research. Several said that their organization could benefit from lab testing, and a few noted other data needs that university researchers could help address. Others expressed interest in partnering with universities to conduct research and analysis on policy, the public health and economic benefits of local food systems, food consumption, and more. One interviewee emphasized that when collaborating with universities on research, it is important to be mission aligned with creating a more equitable food system and to acknowledge the harms that research has historically played in Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Another organizational representative brought up ways to benefit community members and provide financial incentives to gather data. And these examples highlight organizations' focus on prioritizing community interest when conducting research and building enduring relationships of trust between local communities and universities. And an interviewee also noted that many university research findings are inaccessible to the public, and universities should be more intentional with sharing findings with communities.
Right, thanks, Hanan.
And then quickly, just the quote, it reads, university researchers we've previously worked with are not looking at academic research as the primary goal, right? Academic research is the way to make a better food system.
You're here. Right, and so this is the last prompt. I won't do the 60-second thing. Maybe there'll be a pause as people are collecting their thoughts. But what are your thoughts about research collaborations? What works? What doesn't work? How can universities help local organizations through research? Do you have specific research questions?
I can jump in. I just want to say I think universities have done a terrible job of sharing research and information with communities and those that are affected by information. And I think the first step in acknowledging or thinking about how we do research is just to acknowledge a history of kind of helicoptering in and kind of, using organizations for resources, being very extractive in our approaches, and then not really giving them much in return. I think any agreement between a university and an outside agency has to be beneficial for both parties, whether that's through the work itself that's being completed of the project or paying people to be a part of it. I unfortunately, I think universities have sort of put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth over the years. And I think a lot of people shy away from wanting to work with them, and I don't blame them in any way. So I think changing the paradigm and also thinking of organizational hosts and partners as researchers also, and people who can contribute to identifying and solving issues, and not just being people that are sidelined, even though they may not have a fancy university degree. So that's where I would start.
Some responses in the chat. Eileen dropped a link to Chicago Beyond's work on research. It has some info on their guidebook on researching with community organizations, funders, and all social sector leaders. I will definitely be looking at that later. So thank you, Eileen. And then we have another comment that is echoing Kevin's, and especially sharing in a way that meets the literacy and education levels of the community that they took the information and data from. And I want to also second that. We definitely tried to do that with our report as well. And then another comment saying that this is where those ongoing relationships really matter, someone who can advocate for the orgs and farmers and the lens of the academic side. So thank you all for those comments.
Yes. Let's just open it up to anything here. Let's kind of go. I'm just jumping to the last slide. So we do have a summary of all of this that's available, and I'm just going to leave this last slide right here. The summary is you can use that QR code or copy down that link. I suppose we could put it in the chat. But yeah, these were the big sorts of types of collaborations. I would love to hear any holistic thoughts or any additional thoughts about any of these specific ways that universities and communities can collaborate. I'm going to type this into the chat as we're doing this.
It looks like Bruce dropped our report link in the chat.
Oh gosh, you're so fast, Bruce.
He's on it.
Can I still hit return? I'm gonna. You can't stop me. Take your pick.
This is, maybe this is a little tangential, but one just kind of thing that I think is important when sending students out to work with like community farms or partners is acknowledging, like making sure they're going out with empathy and understanding. I think like young people are optimistic and very passionate about like what can be changed in the world, and that's wonderful, and that's like one of the best perks of working with young people. And also I think like having a trusted adult have a conversation with them of being like, if you think something is super obvious, there's likely a reason that like a functional adult is not doing that thing. So like pause and operate with curiosity instead of like the hubris of I know better. Why doesn't someone just do this thing? It's so simple. Because especially like to a lot of the work that you pointed out in the beginning of like lack of capacity, lack of funding, lack of stability, like there are reasons for that. So I think that's just like a caveat in general of like before young people go out into community spaces, like ensuring that someone's having that conversation with them in a very intentional way.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's hugely important, and going in with humility and going in looking to learn and understand why folks are doing things, and not going in as you know, a privileged person saying, yeah, you should be doing it that way or this like that. That's just the worst possible look, and something to be avoided at all costs.
Kind of like to feed off what was just being said, even like doing maybe like a toolkit or like a training on how to, like, what do you get out of being a volunteer if you know you're not, the possibility of getting paid is like very slim. But also like giving tips on like meeting people where they're at or meeting the community where they're at, especially if you're working with vulnerable populations or marginalized populations. Talking about DEI, you know, like things like that, like just having some type of a training that organizations, but even whoever's looking for volunteers, ready and saying like, these are the topics that should be covered in order to be, I don't want to say like a successful volunteer, but a compassionate volunteer.
Absolutely. Thinking about assets before challenges as well, and sort of having that lens when you're thinking about communities, I think is also important just to add. Kevin, did you have a thought there? Nope. All right, I think
I can add one thing, sorry.
No, please.
I'll just piggyback on both of those comments. One thing that I try to do with my students, because we were going to a foreign country, but even if you're not going to a foreign country, going to a farm, you're, you know, out of your element, you just kind of model that you're here in service to their operation. You're here to learn, they're the expert, and it kind of flips the power dynamic of, you know, sort of thinking that this university educated student or partially educated is the one coming in teaching as opposed to learning. And then it just sort of, you just go in there with that sort of assumption going in, and, you know, they're teaching us. And then I also set aside time with students separate from the farmer to ask questions that they maybe were too embarrassed to ask or didn't want to offend to ask. So that can help sometimes too if you're facilitating volunteer work, like, oh, I don't know, so, you know, you don't want the students to constantly feel like they can't even ask questions because they're going to embarrass themselves, or, you know, so you have to, it's nice to set aside that separate time too, to talk, you know, using my environmental sociology background, like, oh, this is why they do it. This is why they're planting in this way. This is an agroecological approach. That's what that means, you know, kind of stuff. So.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks. Let's wrap up. Thank you all for the discussion. And we have a bunch of great stuff in the chat we're going to save, and we've been taking notes on what everybody spoke about. You can find me and other members of our team at the Loyola website. And I think I'm just kind of a rough ending here, but thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you all so much.
All right. And yeah, if anybody's around Friday, I hope to see you in person.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Thanks, Vivian. Hanan. So Emiliano, Alejandro, are you guys okay? Still give me a thumbs up. I can't hear you because it's in Spanish. So this will be recorded. Thanks, Dr. Dubinsky. This is really interesting to me. I'm thrilled about that. I shared in the chat. We have our Stevenson Center library. Just wanted to plug that real quick. We got some research on food sovereignty, and this in particular is interesting to me. So yeah, this is fascinating. I feel like I learned a lot. So
okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
And then like you said, on Friday, see if you guys can make it. It's at the South Shore Market, and everybody can see interface.
Yep.
If that's your thing. And yeah.
Cool. Thanks. All right.
Bruce, is there a way I can still answer the poll, or is it closed?
Yes.
Or do you
There-
not want me to answer the
there
poll?
is,
It's okay.
maybe not you, but I
Yeah,
will
maybe
do it.
not you.
It's like I'm starting reading the questions like, I don't know if you want my feedback. I think not applicable.
And you got the chat, Bruce?
Yeah, I got the chat. So
Okay.
yeah, we can end this now if
Okay.
Emiliano, Alejandro, thank you. Oh, thank you, Heather. Sorry, I forgot to mention you, Heather. Thanks for captioning. Yeah, cool.
All right, cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.